The first sound I heard in 3 weeks was my son Kevin saying, "She's sitting on over 2 million, plus this house is worth at least 800,000. My daughter-in-law Amber's response made my blood freeze. "And she's completely deaf, so we can plan right in front of her stupid face." I'd been pretending my hearing was still gone for 2 days. But what I heard next would destroy their lives forever. Let me start from the beginning. I'm Margaret Thornfield, 71 years old, and I used to teach piano to the sweetest children in our neighborhood. My husband Robert passed 5 years ago, leaving me comfortable but lonely in our big house on Maple Street. Kevin was my only child, and despite his struggles with his real estate career, I loved him with all my heart. When he married Amber 3 years ago, I welcomed her like the daughter I never had. Everything changed on that terrible Tuesday in October. I was carrying laundry upstairs when my slipper caught on the carpet runner. The fall down those hardwood stairs felt endless. I remember the crack when my head hit the banister, then nothing but darkness. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later to Kevin's worried face hovering over me. "Mom, can you hear me?" I watched his lips form the words, saw the genuine concern in his eyes. I tried to respond, but realized I couldn't hear my own voice. The world had gone completely silent. Dr. Martinez, a kind man with gentle eyes, examined me thoroughly. I watched his lips carefully as he spoke to Kevin and Amber. The fall caused severe swelling around the auditory nerve. The surgery to relieve pressure on her brain went well, but I'm afraid the hearing damage appears significant. "Will it come back?" I read Kevin's lips as he asked, seeing the worry creasing his forehead. Dr. Martinez's expression was cautious. "Sometimes patients recover fully, others partially, and some never regain their hearing. We'll monitor her progress. But you should prepare for the possibility that this could be permanent." Amber squeezed my hand and mouthed slowly and clearly, "We're here for you, Margaret." Her face showed nothing but compassion and love. They moved into my house the day I came home from the hospital. Kevin wrote on a notepad, "Just until you're back on your feet, Mom. Amber and I want to take care of you." For the first 2 weeks, they were absolutely wonderful. Kevin would sit with me in the evenings, showing me old photo albums and writing funny stories about his childhood on his notepad to make me smile. Amber cooked my favorite meals and was endlessly patient with my struggles to communicate. I watched her learn basic sign language from YouTube videos, practicing the gestures over and over to help us talk better. I felt so grateful to have such loving family during the darkest time of my life. How adorable that I thought their sudden devotion was genuine instead of them just waiting for me to die quietly. When I saw them whispering to each other occasionally, I assumed they were just discussing my care or trying not to burden me with their worries. Then, everything changed. If you're watching this, hit subscribe and let me know where you're watching from, because this gets absolutely insane. It started on a Wednesday morning in my 3rd week home. I was sitting in my recliner, working on a crossword puzzle, when I heard the faintest sound, like water running through pipes. I froze, pencil halfway to the paper. Could it be? I sat perfectly still, straining to detect anything else. There, the refrigerator humming. So quiet I almost missed it. But definitely there. My hearing was starting to come back. Over the next 2 days, sounds trickled in like a gentle stream becoming a river. The clock ticking on the mantel, birds chirping outside my window, Kevin's footsteps on the hardwood floors. And then, I heard something that changed everything. I was pretending to nap in my chair when Kevin and Amber came into the living room. They moved quietly, clearly thinking I was asleep in my silent world. "How much longer do we have to keep up this caring act?" Amber's voice was sharp and irritated, completely different from the gentle tone she used when facing me. "Just until we figure out the next step," Kevin replied casually. But honestly, this might work out better than I thought. My heart started pounding, but I forced myself to keep my breathing steady and my eyes closed. "What do you mean?" Amber asked. "Think about it. She can't hear us. She's completely dependent on us. And she trusts us completely. We have total access to everything now." Ah, yes, the classic mistake of underestimating a woman who spent 30 years managing classrooms full of sneaky teenagers. "I've been going through her papers while she naps," Kevin continued. "Mom has way more money than I ever realized. Her bank statements show over $1 million in savings alone." "Seriously?" I could hear the excitement in Amber's voice. "That's not even counting her investment accounts or the value of this house. We're talking about serious money, Amber, Over 2 million total. I heard papers shuffling as they went through my private financial documents. Look at this statement. She's got stocks, bonds, retirement accounts she never even touches. She's been living like she's poor when she's actually loaded. The casual way they discussed my money, like it already belonged to them, made me feel sick. So, what are you thinking? Amber asked. I'm thinking that if she's going to be deaf and helpless anyway, maybe we should be the ones managing her finances. For her own protection, of course. She'd have to sign papers for that, Amber pointed out. Kevin laughed quietly. She trusts me completely. If I tell her it's for her safety, she'll sign anything I put in front of her. She can't even hear the lawyer explain what she's signing. They were planning to steal from me, and they thought it was funny. Kevin always did have a twisted sense of humor. I just never thought it would include robbing his own mother. You know what else I've been thinking? Amber said. She really can't live alone anymore. Not like this. Maybe we should look into assisted living facilities. That's actually brilliant, Kevin agreed. If she's in a facility, we could manage everything for her. The house, the money, all of it. And those places are expensive. It would be totally reasonable for us to sell the house to pay for her care. How expensive? Amber asked. The nice places run about $4,000 a month. But think about it. We'd have this whole house to ourselves and complete control over her assets. I lay there in shock, listening to my son and his wife plan to rob me blind and ship me off to a nursing home like an unwanted piece of furniture. She won't last much longer anyway, Amber said casually, like she was discussing the weather. I mean, she's already showing signs of confusion since the accident. That was a lie. My mind was as sharp as ever, apparently sharper than theirs, since they couldn't figure out that talking about murdering someone 10 feet away from them might not be the brightest idea. The sooner we get her settled somewhere, the better, Kevin agreed, for everyone involved. As their footsteps moved toward the kitchen, I made a decision that would change everything. My hearing had returned, but they didn't need to know that. Let them think I was still helpless and deaf while I figured out exactly what they were planning. I had no idea how much worse their betrayal would get. For the next few days, I perfected my act. I continued responding only to visual cues, pointing and gesturing when I needed something. I kept my expression blank when they spoke around me, showing no reaction to sudden noises. Meanwhile, I listened to every conversation. I looked up that assisted living place you mentioned, Amber said while making breakfast. Sunset Manor. They have an opening next month. Perfect timing, Kevin replied. I've been talking to Jake from my office about getting the house appraised. Already? Amber sounded surprised. We need to know what we're working with. Jake thinks in this market we could get at least $800,000. Maybe more if we stage it right. I sat at the kitchen table, slowly eating my oatmeal and pretending not to hear them planning to sell my home out from under me. What about her stuff? Amber asked. All this furniture, the piano, her personal things? Estate sale, Kevin said without hesitation. Most of it's just old junk anyway. The piano might be worth something. It's a decent brand. That piano was where I'd taught hundreds of children over 30 years. It was where Kevin himself had reluctantly taken lessons as a boy. Now he was calling it old junk and planning to sell it for cash. Have you thought about the will situation? Amber asked quietly. What do you mean? Well, if she's going to be in a facility long term and if her condition gets worse, Amber paused. I just think we should make sure everything is set up properly. Kevin was quiet for a moment. The will hasn't been updated since Dad died. Everything comes to me as the only heir. But what if she decides to change it? What if she gets suspicious? She won't, Kevin said confidently. She trusts me completely, and she can't hear what lawyers tell her anyway. Besides, in her condition, we could probably argue that she's not mentally competent to make those kinds of decisions. I wasn't incompetent. I was sitting 10 feet away, understanding every word of their scheme. I've been doing some research, Amber said, lowering her voice, about elderly care and medication management. What kind of research? Did you know that older people often have bad reactions to multiple medications, especially after head injuries? Sometimes the combinations can cause confusion, memory problems, even more serious complications. Nothing says loving daughter-in-law like researching creative ways to poison your husband's mother. I was starting to understand why Amber's nursing career had been so short-lived. Kevin's voice sharpened with interest. What are you saying? I'm saying that if someone were already taking several medications for legitimate reasons and they accidentally got a higher dose or the wrong combination, it would look completely natural, especially in someone her age with a recent head injury. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of my spoon scraping the bowl. I kept eating, kept my expression neutral, while my son and daughter-in-law discussed drugging me. That's, Kevin started. That's what? Amber asked. That's actually smart thinking, he finished, just in case her condition doesn't decline naturally fast enough. I managed to swallow my last bite of oatmeal without choking, but inside I was screaming. They weren't just planning to steal from me and abandon me. They were planning to kill me. That afternoon, while Kevin was at his office and Amber was grocery shopping, I acted quickly. I called the one person I trusted completely, Harrison Webb, the lawyer who'd handled Robert's estate. Margaret, how wonderful to hear from you, Harrison said warmly. How are you recovering from your accident? Harrison, I need to see you urgently, I said, keeping my voice low even though I was alone. And I need you to promise me something. No one can know about this meeting. Not Kevin, not anyone. His tone grew concerned. Of course. Is everything all right? No, I said simply. It's not. Can you come to the house tomorrow around 10? Kevin and Amber will be out running errands. I'll be there. The next morning, Harrison arrived exactly on time. When I answered the door, speaking clearly and moving normally, his eyes widened in shock. Margaret, you're hearing. You can hear me perfectly. Yes, and that's exactly the problem. Come in quickly. I told him everything. The returned hearing, the overheard conversations about stealing my money, their plans to put me in a nursing home, and most horrifying of all, Amber's research into medication, accidents. Harrison's face grew paler with each revelation. My God, Margaret, you're talking about elder abuse, financial exploitation, and potentially attempted murder. I know exactly what I'm talking about, I said firmly, and I need your help to stop them. We need to call the police immediately. Not yet, I said. Right now, it's my word against theirs, and they'll just claim I'm confused from the head injury. I need more evidence, something that will hold up in court. Harrison leaned forward. What do you want to do? I smiled for the first time in weeks. First, I want to change my will, completely. And then, I want to give them enough rope to hang themselves with. We spent the next hour drafting a new will. Everything, the house, the investments, every penny, would go to various charities. Kevin would inherit exactly $1, with a note explaining it was more than his betrayal deserved. Are you absolutely certain about this? Harrison asked as I signed the documents. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. After Harrison left, I made another call to Joe Martinez, who owned a security company and had installed systems for half the neighborhood. His son Tommy had been one of my favorite piano students. Mrs. Thornfield, Tommy told me about your accident. How are you doing? I'm doing better than people think, Joe. I need a big favor, and I need you to keep it completely confidential. Can you come by tomorrow morning? I'll explain everything then. Of course, whatever you need. The next day, Joe arrived with a bag of equipment. I explained that I suspected Kevin and Amber were planning to steal from me, though I kept the murder plot to myself for now. You want me to install hidden cameras in your own house? Joe asked, surprised but not judgmental. Small ones, with audio recording. I need to document what happens when they think I can't hear them. Joe was thorough and professional. Within 2 hours, he'd installed tiny cameras in the living room, kitchen, and hallway, all invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The audio quality is excellent, he assured me. Everything will be recorded to a cloud server that only you can access. Thank you, Joe. And remember, I was never here, he said with an understanding nod. Take care of yourself, Mrs. Thornfield. Now I had everything I needed, a new will, legal counsel, and the ability to record their conversations. All I had to do was wait for them to provide the evidence that would destroy them. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, I got the conversation that would seal their fate. I was in my recliner, pretending to read while Kevin and Amber sat at the kitchen table with Kevin's laptop open. They thought I was safely trapped in my silent world, unaware that every word was being recorded. I called Sunset Manor today, Amber announced. They can take her next month if we want the spot. How much? Kevin asked. $4,000 a month plus additional fees for special care. But here's the thing. They want 6 months paid in advance. That's $24,000 up front, Kevin calculated. Plus, we'd need to liquidate some of her investments to cover ongoing costs. Which gives us the perfect excuse to get power of attorney, Amber said. We tell her it's to make sure her care is paid for. Kevin laughed. She'll sign anything if I tell her it's for her own good. She trusts me completely. What about after that? Amber asked quietly. What do you mean? I mean, what if she lives there for years? That's $48,000 a year. Kevin, even with her money that adds up. Kevin was quiet for a long moment. You're right. We need a more permanent solution. I've been thinking about that, Amber said, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. About what I mentioned before, the medication thing. Go on? Well, once she's in the facility, we'd be managing all her medications anyway, and those places are understaffed. They rely on family members to help with pill management. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that elderly people in nursing homes die from medication errors all the time. It's tragic, but it happens. And with her recent head injury and age, no one would question it. My hand started trembling, but I forced myself to keep holding the book steady. How would we... Kevin started. I still have contacts from when I worked as a nurse, Amber said. I know which medications can cause problems when combined, especially in someone her age. Heart medications mixed with certain other drugs can cause cardiac events, completely undetectable in an elderly patient. That's... Kevin paused. That's actually brilliant. The best part is, we'd look like the grieving family who did everything we could for her. No one would suspect anything. How long would it take? Kevin asked. A few months at most. We'd need to be gradual about it. Can't be too obvious. But by Christmas, we could be settling her estate. Christmas was only 2 months away. They were planning to murder me by Christmas. Speaking of the estate, Kevin said, I had Jake run those numbers on the house. In the current market, we're looking at least $850, maybe $900,000. Plus all her accounts, Amber added. We're talking about well over $2 million total. We'll get rid of that useless old hag and grab the inheritance, Kevin said with satisfaction. Best decision we ever made, moving in here. There it was, the exact phrase that would become the title of my story. But hearing it in person from my own son's mouth was like being stabbed in the heart. Just think, Amber continued. By next spring, we could buy that house we looked at in Riverside, the one with the pool and the 3-car garage. And I could finally quit that miserable real estate job, Kevin added. Maybe start my own company with real capital behind me. They were already spending my money, already planning their new life built on my murder. Are you sure she can't hear any of this? Amber asked suddenly. Kevin looked over at me. I kept my eyes focused on my book, turning a page at just the right moment. Completely deaf, he confirmed. We could set off fireworks in here and she wouldn't notice. Good, Amber said, because I want to show you what medications would work best. I heard her get up and leave the room, returning a few minutes later with her laptop. Look at this, she said. Digitalis toxicity combined with her current blood pressure medication. It would look like a heart attack brought on by the stress of adjusting to the nursing home. How do you know all this? Kevin asked, sounding impressed. I told you. I was a nurse for 8 years before we got married. I know exactly how these drugs interact, and more importantly, I know how to make it look accidental. They spent the next 20 minutes researching my murder like they were planning a vacation. I had to admire their thoroughness. If only they'd put this much effort into their actual careers, they might not have needed to kill me for money. When they finally closed their laptops and went to bed, I sat in the dark living room, shaking with rage and terror. But underneath those emotions was something else, something cold and determined. They wanted to play games with a helpless old woman? They had no idea who they were dealing with. Clearly, they'd forgotten that I'd spent decades outsmarting people who thought they were cleverer than me. The only difference between my son and a misbehaving 8-year-old was that Kevin was about to learn a much more expensive lesson. The next morning, I put on the performance of my life. I shuffled to breakfast, acting confused about which chair was mine. I fumbled with my coffee cup, spilling a little on the table. When Amber brought me my regular medications, I made a show of looking puzzled. Your morning pills, Margaret, she said slowly, exaggerating her lip movements. For your blood pressure and heart. I nodded vaguely and took the pills, but as I'd been doing for weeks, I palmed 2 unfamiliar white tablets that weren't part of my original prescription. Later, I'd examine them under my bedroom lamp. They were unmarked, but I was certain they weren't legitimate medication. "I need to run to the pharmacy today," Amber announced to Kevin. "Margaret's almost out of her heart medication." That was a lie. I had a full bottle in my medicine cabinet that they'd hidden from me. While they were both out that afternoon, I made several important phone calls. First, I called Dr. Martinez's office. "This is Margaret Thornfield. I need to schedule an appointment to review my current medications. I want to make sure I'm not taking anything that wasn't specifically prescribed for me." "Of course, Mrs. Thornfield. How about Thursday at 2? "Perfect. And please don't mention this appointment to anyone who might call asking about my care. I want to discuss some concerns privately with the doctor." Next, I called Detective Rodriguez at the local police station. Harrison had given me his name as someone who specialized in elder abuse cases. "Detective Rodriguez, this is Margaret Thornfield on Maple Street. I need to report a crime in progress. But it's complicated. Could you come by tomorrow morning around 10? My family will be out, and I need to speak with you privately." "What kind of crime are we talking about, Mrs. Thornfield?" "Financial exploitation and potentially attempted murder," I said simply. "But I have evidence, and I need your help to handle this properly." There was a pause. "I'll be there at 10 sharp. Finally, I called Harrison back. "I need you to contact the prosecutor's office. I want to know exactly what kind of evidence they'd need to press charges for elder abuse, financial exploitation, and attempted murder." "Margaret, what's happened?" "I'll explain tomorrow. Just find out what we need to build an airtight case." That evening, Kevin and Amber were particularly attentive at dinner. Kevin cut my meat for me without being asked, and Amber kept refilling my water glass. "Mom, we've been thinking," Kevin said, making sure I could see his lips clearly. "We want to make sure you're getting the best possible care." I nodded encouragingly. "We found a wonderful facility called Sunset Manor. It's specifically designed for people with hearing loss and other challenges. We think you'd be much happier there with professional staff and other people in similar situations." Amber leaned forward. "The best part is they handle all the medical management for you. No more worrying about pills or appointments. They take care of everything." I made my expression hopeful and trusting, like this sounded wonderful. "There are just some papers you'd need to sign," Kevin continued. "Legal stuff to make sure we can handle your finances and medical decisions while you're there. Just to protect you." I nodded eagerly and reached for his hand, squeezing it with apparent gratitude. Inside, I was disgusted by how easily they thought they could manipulate me. "We can take care of all that tomorrow," Amber said sweetly. "I'll call our lawyer and have him bring the documents by." Their lawyer. Not Harrison, who actually represented my interests. I was almost impressed by their audacity. Not only were they planning to steal from me, but they were bringing their own legal team to make it official. "And don't worry about the cost," Kevin added. "We'll make sure everything is handled properly. You just focus on getting better." That night, I lay in bed listening to them celebrate in the living room. "She actually seemed excited about the nursing home," Amber said, laughing. "Did you see how grateful she looked when I mentioned handling her finances?" Kevin replied. "This is going to be easier than we thought. How soon can we get the power of attorney paperwork?" "My guy said he can have everything ready by tomorrow afternoon. Once she signs, we'll have complete control over her accounts. And then? Then we move her to Sunset Manor next week and start Phase 2 of the plan." Phase 2. My murder. I closed my eyes and tried to stay calm. In less than 24 hours, Detective Rodriguez would be here. The cameras were recording everything. Dr. Martinez would confirm that the pills they'd been giving me weren't prescribed. They thought they were so clever, manipulating a helpless, deaf woman. They had no idea they'd been performing for an audience this entire time. Tomorrow, the show would be over. Detective Rodriguez arrived exactly at 10, just as Kevin and Amber left for what they thought was a routine morning of errands. He was a serious man in his 50s, with kind eyes and an air of competence that immediately put me at ease. "Mrs. Thornfield, you mentioned financial exploitation and attempted murder. Those are serious charges." "I know exactly how serious they are," I said, leading him to the living room. "And I have proof of everything. I started from the beginning, the accident, the fake deafness, the gradual revelation of their plans." Rodriguez took careful notes, asking precise questions about dates, times, and specific conversations. You said you have recordings? He asked. I showed him Joe's hidden cameras and played back several of the most damning conversations. Rodriguez's expression grew darker as he listened to Kevin and Amber discuss drugging me and planning my death. This is definitely attempted murder, he said grimly, plus elder abuse, financial exploitation, and conspiracy. We have enough here to arrest them both. I want to do this right, I said. I want them to face the full consequences of what they've planned. What do you have in mind? I smiled. They're coming back this afternoon with legal papers they want me to sign. Power of attorney documents that would give them complete control over my finances. I want you to witness that conversation. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. We'll need backup officers and probably social services involved. This is going to be a complex arrest. There's something else, I said, pulling out the envelope of white pills I'd been saving. They've been drugging me with these. I need them tested to prove what they were doing. Rodriguez examined the pills carefully. We'll fast-track the analysis. If these contain what I think they do, it adds another charge to the list. We spent another hour planning exactly how to handle the afternoon confrontation. Rodriguez would be hidden in the kitchen with a clear view of the living room, with backup officers positioned outside. Everything would be recorded from multiple angles. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Rodriguez asked. We could arrest them now based on what we already have. No, I said firmly. I want them to show their true colors one more time. I want there to be absolutely no doubt about their intentions. At 2 o'clock, Kevin and Amber returned with a man I didn't recognize, presumably their lawyer. I was sitting in my recliner, looking frail and confused as they entered. Mom, this is Mr. Patterson, Kevin said slowly, facing me so I could read his lips. He's here to help us with those papers we discussed. Patterson looked uncomfortable. Are you certain she understands what she's signing? She seems quite... She has good days and bad days, Amber interrupted. Today is a good day. She's very excited about moving to the care facility. I nodded enthusiastically and made happy gestures toward Patterson. The first document transfers power of attorney for all financial decisions, Patterson explained, though he was clearly addressing Kevin rather than me. The second gives you medical decision-making authority. Kevin guided my hand to the first signature line. This just means I can help pay your bills and manage your accounts, Mom, to make sure you're taken care of. I made my signature shaky and uncertain, like someone whose motor skills were declining. The second document is similar, Patterson continued. It allows your son to make medical decisions if you're unable to communicate your wishes. As I signed the second paper, Amber leaned over to Kevin. Once these are filed, we can move her next week, right? Absolutely, Kevin replied quietly. And then we can start the medication adjustments we discussed. Patterson looked sharply at them. What medication adjustments? Kevin and Amber exchanged glances. Just optimizing her care for the facility, Amber said smoothly. I have nursing experience, so I'll be coordinating with their medical staff. That was when Detective Rodriguez stepped out of the kitchen. Actually, I think we need to discuss those medication plans in more detail, he said, showing his badge. The room exploded into chaos. Patterson jumped back from the table. Kevin's face went white, and Amber immediately started talking. Officer, there's been some kind of misunderstanding, she began. No misunderstanding, Rodriguez said calmly. Margaret Thornfield, would you like to tell them what you've been hearing for the past several weeks? I stood up slowly, meeting Kevin's shocked eyes. I heard every word, I said clearly. Every conversation about stealing my money, every plan to put me in a nursing home, and every detail of how you plan to murder me. Kevin's mouth fell open. Mom, you can hear? I can hear perfectly, I said. I've been able to hear for weeks. I heard you call me a useless old hag. I heard you research ways to kill me with medication. I heard you plan to inherit my money and buy a house with a pool. Amber lunged forward. You don't understand. We were trying to help you. Help me? I laughed bitterly. By poisoning me with unmarked pills? By planning to drug me to death in a nursing home? Rodriguez stepped forward. Kevin Thornfield and Amber Thornfield, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, financial exploitation, and attempted poisoning. As the backup officers entered to handcuff them, Kevin looked at me with desperate eyes. Mom, please, I'm your son. My son died the day he decided I was worth more dead than alive. I said quietly. I don't know who you are anymore. The last thing I heard as they were led away was Amber screaming that I was a crazy old woman and no one would believe me. She was wrong. Everyone believed me. I had the recordings to prove it. Amazing how technology works when you're not too arrogant to think your victims might fight back. The story exploded across local news within hours. Son and daughter-in-law arrested for plotting to murder elderly mother. The recordings I'd captured were clear evidence of their guilt, and the pills they'd been giving me tested positive for a sedative that wasn't prescribed by any doctor. Dr. Martinez confirmed that the medication could have caused the confusion and weakness they'd been attributing to my head injury. In higher doses, or combined with certain other drugs, this could have been fatal, he told the prosecutors. Harrison handled the legal fallout beautifully. The power of attorney documents Kevin and Amber had tricked me into signing were immediately voided since they'd been obtained through fraud. More importantly, my new will remained sealed and unchanged. They never suspected you'd updated your will? Harrison asked during one of our meetings. They were so confident in their manipulation skills, I said. They thought I was just a helpless old woman who'd sign anything they put in front of me. Kevin and Amber's lawyer tried to argue that the recordings were obtained illegally, but since they were made in my own home with my consent, they were perfectly admissible. Their backup plan of claiming I was mentally incompetent fell apart when Dr. Martinez testified that my cognitive abilities were completely normal. The trial lasted 2 weeks. I testified on the first day, playing the recordings of their conversations about my planned murder. The jury looked horrified as they listened to Kevin describe me as a useless old hag and Amber research cardiac drugs to kill me with. Did you ever suspect your son might harm you? The prosecutor asked. Never, I said honestly. I loved him completely and trusted him with my life. That trust nearly got me killed. Kevin's lawyer tried to paint him as a stressed caregiver who'd made some poor comments, but never intended actual harm. That argument crumbled when they played Amber's recorded research into lethal drug combinations. Amber's defense was even weaker. Her nursing background actually made her planning look more sinister, not less. The prosecutor pointed out that she knew exactly how to kill someone and make it look natural. This wasn't a moment of frustration or poor judgment, he told the jury. This was a cold, calculated plan to murder an elderly woman for her money. The verdicts came back guilty on all counts. Kevin received 15 years for conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, and financial exploitation. Amber got 12 years for the same charges, though her sentence was slightly reduced because she hadn't been the primary beneficiary. As they were led away after sentencing, Kevin looked back at me one more time. I felt nothing. No sadness, no regret, no lingering love. The son I'd raised was gone, replaced by a stranger who'd tried to kill me. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked if I felt justice had been served. Justice would have been having a son who loved me, I said. This is just consequences. 6 months later, I sold the house on Maple Street. Too many bad memories lived in those rooms now. I found a beautiful, smaller home in a different neighborhood, 2 bedrooms, 1 story, with a lovely garden and a sunroom perfect for a piano. The money from the sale, combined with my investments, left me more financially secure than ever. Ironically, Kevin and Amber's scheme had forced me to take a hard look at my finances, and I discovered I was worth even more than they'd calculated. I could have traveled the world, bought luxury cars, lived like a queen. Instead, I did something that would have horrified my would-be murderers. I started spending money on myself and people I cared about. I bought a brand new grand piano for the sunroom and started teaching again. Not for money this time, but for the joy of sharing music with children who reminded me why life was worth living. My first student was Sofia Rodriguez, Detective Rodriguez's 8-year-old daughter. Mrs. Thornfield taught my daddy to catch bad guys, she announced to anyone who would listen. Now she's teaching me to play songs. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Soon, I had a waiting list of children eager to learn piano from the famous lady who caught the bad guys. Their parents paid me generously, but I put most of the money into a fund for music education in local schools. The house next door was occupied by the Gonzalez family, Maria, Carlos, and their 3 children. They'd moved from Mexico 5 years ago and worked incredibly hard to build a life here. Carlos was a landscaper. Maria cleaned offices at night, And all 3 kids were honor students. It started with small gestures. I'd make extra soup and bring some over. I'd help the youngest, Isabella, with her English homework. When their car broke down and they couldn't afford repairs, I quietly paid the mechanic. "Senora Margaret, you don't have to do this," Maria protested when she found out. "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I'm just helping my neighbors the way neighbors should help each other." Within months, they'd adopted me as family. The children called me Abuela Margaret, and I was invited to every birthday, holiday, and celebration. When Isabella lost her first tooth, she ran to my house to show me before her own parents. "Why are you so kind to us?" Carlos asked one evening as we sat on my porch watching the kids play. "Because you treat me like family," I said simply. "Real family isn't about blood. It's about love and respect." The contrast wasn't lost on me. Kevin, my biological son, had seen me as nothing but a source of money to be eliminated when convenient. The Gonzalez family saw me as a person worth caring about, worth including, worth loving. When Maria's mother in Mexico became seriously ill, they couldn't afford the trip home. I bought their plane tickets without hesitation. "We can't accept this," Carlos said, tears in his eyes. "You're not accepting charity," I told him firmly. "You're accepting help from someone who loves you. There's a difference." While they were gone, I missed them terribly. Their house felt empty, and my own house felt too quiet without Isabella's laughter echoing from next door. That's when I realized something important. I wasn't just helping them. They were saving me too. 1 year after the trial, I received a letter from Kevin in prison. My first instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. "Mom," it began, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. Not just sorry I got caught, but sorry for what I planned to do to you. Prison gives you a lot of time to think, and I've been thinking about what kind of person I became." The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing his regrets and claiming he'd found religion behind bars. He talked about the therapy programs he was attending and how he was working on himself. "I don't expect forgiveness," he wrote in closing, "but I hope someday you might be willing to visit me. I want to try to explain how I lost my way so badly." I read the letter twice, then walked to my fireplace and burned it. Some people might call that harsh, but I'd learned something important over the past year. Forgiveness doesn't require you to let toxic people back into your life. I could forgive Kevin for my own peace of mind without ever trusting him again. 2 weeks later, I received a similar letter from Amber. Hers was shorter and angrier, claiming she'd been led astray by Kevin and that her sentence was unfair. She blamed me for tricking them with my fake deafness and suggested that everything that happened was somehow my fault. I didn't even finish reading that one before it joined Kevin's letter in the fireplace. Harrison stopped by that afternoon with some legal papers to sign, something about finalizing the asset transfers from my old will. "Any word from Kevin or Amber?" he asked carefully. "Nothing worth mentioning," I said. "How are they adjusting to prison life?" "Kevin's in a minimum security facility. He's apparently been a model prisoner, participating in educational programs. Amber's having a harder time at the women's correctional facility. She's been written up several times for fighting with other inmates." "I'm not surprised," I said. Kevin was always better at playing the victim, when it suited him. Harrison studied my face. "Do you ever regret how things turned out?" I thought about that question for a long moment. I regret that my son became someone capable of planning my murder. I regret that I raised a child who could see his mother as nothing but a source of money. But do I regret stopping them? Never. What about the inheritance? They would have gotten everything if you hadn't changed your will. I smiled. The best part is, they still think they would have inherited millions. They don't know that every penny is going to charity. Even in prison, they're probably still fantasizing about the money they'll never see. That evening, I sat in my sunroom playing piano while Isabella and her brothers did homework at my kitchen table. This had become our routine. They'd come over after school, I'd help with homework and give piano lessons. Then Maria would collect them for dinner. "Abuela Margaret," Isabella said, looking up from her math problems. "My teacher said you're famous." "What did she tell you?" "She said you're very brave, and you caught some bad people who wanted to hurt you." I considered how to explain this to an 8-year-old. Sometimes people we trust disappoint us badly. But that doesn't mean we stop trusting everyone. It means we learn to choose better people to trust. "Like us?" she asked hopefully. "Exactly like you," I said, ruffling her hair. You and your family are the best choice I ever made." 2 years after the trial, my life had settled into a rhythm that filled me with contentment I'd never experienced before. My little house was always full of music and laughter. The Gonzalez children had become genuine experts on the piano, and I'd started a small recital program that brought families from all over our neighborhood together. Detective Rodriguez and his wife became regular dinner guests, along with Harrison and his family. Joe Martinez, who'd installed my security cameras, often stopped by with his grandchildren for impromptu music lessons. "You've built quite a community here," Harrison observed during one of our monthly dinners. "I've learned that the best revenge is living well," I said. "Kevin and Amber wanted to erase me from existence and take my money. Instead, I'm more alive than I've been in years, and my money is going to causes that actually matter." The local newspaper had done a follow-up story on my case, focusing on elder abuse prevention. I'd become an inadvertent spokesperson for elderly people who were being mistreated by family members. "The hardest part," I told the reporter, "is accepting that someone you love sees you as disposable. But once you accept that reality, you can take steps to protect yourself." The story led to speaking invitations at senior centers and community groups. I'd tell my story and talk about warning signs that family members might be planning financial exploitation, or worse. "Trust your instincts," I'd always tell the audiences. "If someone's behavior toward you changes dramatically, especially after you become vulnerable, pay attention. Don't dismiss red flags because you want to believe the best about people you love." After one such speaking engagement, an elderly woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "My daughter has been acting strange since my husband died," she said quietly. "She's been asking a lot of questions about my will and suggesting I might be safer in assisted living. After hearing your story, I'm worried." I gave her Harrison's card and Detective Rodriguez's contact information. "Don't wait to get help," I told her. "It's better to be wrong about suspicions than to be right and unprepared." 3 months later, she called to thank me. Her daughter had indeed been planning to drug her and claim power of attorney under false pretenses. The police investigation I'd encouraged had prevented another tragedy. "You saved my life," she said. "You saved your own life by listening to your instincts," I corrected. "I just gave you permission to trust what you already knew." On the 3rd anniversary of my accident, I threw a party, not to celebrate my fall, but to celebrate my survival and the wonderful life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal. The Gonzalez family decorated my house with flowers and balloons. Isabella, now 11 and an accomplished pianist, performed a solo she'd been practicing for weeks. Carlos grilled hamburgers while Maria made her famous salsa. Detective Rodriguez brought his famous potato salad, and Harrison showed up with enough ice cream to feed a small army. As I looked around my backyard full of people who genuinely cared about me, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not gratitude for what Kevin and Amber had tried to do. I'll never be thankful for that betrayal. But gratitude for the strength I'd found to fight back, and for the real family I'd discovered in the process. "Speech! Speech!" someone called out, and soon everyone was chanting for me to say something. I stood up, looking at the faces of people who'd chosen to love me not for what I could give them, but for who I was. 3 years ago, I learned that the family you're born into isn't always the family that will stand by you, I began. But I also learned that the family you choose, the people who see your worth and celebrate your existence, those relationships are stronger than blood. I raised my glass of lemonade. To chosen family, to second chances, and to the truth that no one can take away your dignity unless you let them. "To Margaret," everyone cheered. And I felt more blessed than any millionaire had a right to feel. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up with Maria and Isabella, my young honorary granddaughter asked me a question that stopped me in my tracks. "Abuela Margaret, do you ever miss your real son?" I thought carefully before answering. "I miss the son I thought I had," I said finally. "But I don't miss the person he actually turned out to be. And I'm grateful every day that I found out the truth before it was too late." "Are you happy now?" Isabella asked. I looked around my house, filled with pictures of my chosen family, echoing with the music we made together, warm with the love we shared freely. "Happier than I've ever been in my life," I said, and I meant every word. The boy I'd raised had tried to erase me for money. Instead, He'd given me the greatest gift of all, the chance to discover who I really was when I stopped trying to please people who didn't deserve my love. I was Margaret Thornfield, 74 years old, surrounded by people who saw me as a treasure rather than a burden. And that, I realized, was the best revenge of all. Who knew that attempted murder could be such an excellent life coach? Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. The first sound I heard after 23 years of silence was my son David calling me a worthless burden to his wife Jennifer. 2 hours later, I walked into their kitchen with a smile on my face, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. That's when I realized my family had no idea what was coming for them. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how I got here. 3 weeks ago, Dr. Martinez at St. Mary's Hospital performed what he called a miracle surgery on my damaged ear canals. 23 years earlier, a drunk driver had crashed into my car, leaving me completely deaf and my husband Robert dead. I'd learned sign language, lived quietly, and raised David the best I could as a single mother. The surgery was experimental, expensive, and had only a 30% success rate. David had been furious when I'd insisted on using my savings for it. "Mom, you're 68 years old. Why put yourself through this risk?" he'd argued. But something inside me refused to give up hope. The morning I woke up in the hospital recovery room, I heard a nurse's footsteps echoing down the hallway. Then her voice, clear as crystal, saying, "Good morning, Mrs. Sinclair. How are you feeling?" I cried for an hour straight, not from pain, but from pure joy. The world had sound again. Dr. Martinez was amazed. "Your hearing is actually better than normal range, Eleanor. It's like your brain compensated for all those lost years." He explained I'd need to adjust slowly. That sounds might seem overwhelming at first. He was right. Everything seemed amplified, from the beeping machines to the whispered conversations in the hallway. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of announcing my success immediately, I decided to surprise my family. I imagined their faces lighting up when I responded to their voices for the first time in over 2 decades. I pictured David's amazement, Jennifer's tears of joy, my grandchildren Michael and Sarah finally having real conversations with their grandmother. I spent a week in recovery, practicing my poker face with the nursing staff. "Remember, not a word to anyone," I told them. "This is going to be the most wonderful surprise." They thought it was sweet, this grandmother planning such a loving revelation. The day before my discharge, David visited. He sat beside my bed, moving his lips in the exaggerated way he'd developed over the years, assuming I was reading them. "Mom, Jennifer's prepared the guest room. You'll stay with us during recovery." His voice was strained, tired. I nodded and smiled, giving him a thumbs up like always. What I didn't realize was that I was about to discover who my family really was when they thought I couldn't hear them. And let me tell you, the truth was more devastating than 23 years of silence had ever been. I arrived at David and Jennifer's house on Maple Street, carrying the small overnight bag I'd packed at the hospital. Their 2-story colonial looked exactly the same as it had for the past 15 years. Manicured lawn, white picket fence, and the American flag David insisted on flying year-round. I'd helped them buy this house when David was starting his accounting practice. Jennifer opened the front door with what I now recognized as a forced smile. Her lips moved in the slow, deliberate way she'd adopted since my accident. "Welcome home, Eleanor. We're so glad you're feeling better." Her voice was pleasant enough, but there was something in her tone I'd never noticed before. A subtle impatience, like she was reading from a script she'd rather not perform. I gave her my usual grateful nod and let her guide me inside. The guest room was on the first floor, converted from what used to be David's home office. Jennifer had decorated it with floral wallpaper and lace curtains, her idea of what an elderly woman would find comforting. Honestly, it looked like a funeral parlor, but I'd never complained. How could I, when I couldn't hear their explanations anyway? "The bathroom is right across the hall," Jennifer said, her mouth moving with exaggerated precision. "Dinner will be ready in an hour." She patted my shoulder and left me to unpack. For 23 years, I'd lived in relative isolation. David visited twice a month, Jennifer accompanied him about half the time, and my grandchildren Michael and Sarah showed up for birthdays and major holidays. They were good kids, but they'd grown up with a grandmother who couldn't participate in normal conversations. Sign language had never come naturally to them. I'd filled my silent years with reading, gardening, and volunteering at the local food bank, where communication was mostly about sorting and organizing rather than talking. It had been a peaceful life, if lonely. I'd convinced myself that I was grateful for whatever contact my family provided. Now, as I sat on the edge of the guest room bed, I could hear everything. The refrigerator humming in the kitchen, a neighbor's dog barking 3 houses down, the television in the living room playing some afternoon talk show. After decades of silence, it was almost overwhelming. But what struck me most was hearing my own breathing, my own heartbeat. For 23 years, I'd lived in a soundless bubble. Now I was part of the world again, able to eavesdrop on conversations, to understand context and subtext, to finally hear what people really thought when they believed no one was listening. David arrived home from work at exactly 6:15, just like he had every day for the past decade. I heard his key in the front door, his footsteps on the hardwood floor, the sound of his briefcase hitting the kitchen counter. "How's the patient?" he asked Jennifer. They were in the kitchen, probably assuming I was resting in the guest room with the door closed. "Fine, I guess," Jennifer replied. Her voice sounded different than it had an hour earlier, less careful, more natural. "She seems tired, but that's expected after surgery." "Good. Hopefully this recovery goes quickly. I can't take much more time off work." There it was, the first crack in the facade. David wasn't concerned about my health. He was worried about the inconvenience my presence created in his schedule. That evening at dinner, I watched my family's faces while they performed what I now understood was elaborate theater for my benefit. David carved the roast beef with exaggerated gestures, making sure I could see every action. Jennifer pointed to each dish as she served it, mouthing the names slowly: mashed potatoes, green beans, gravy. Michael, my 20-year-old grandson, was home from college for spring break. He sat across from me, occasionally waving and giving me thumbs up when he remembered I was there. Sarah, 18, and in her senior year of high school, barely looked up from her phone during the entire meal. For 2 decades, I'd assumed their behavior was simply the natural result of our communication barrier. How wrong I'd been. "Grandma looks good, doesn't she?" David said to Jennifer, speaking as if I weren't sitting right there. "It's something people do around deaf individuals. They discuss you in your presence, assuming you can't understand." "The surgery was successful then?" Jennifer asked. "Too early to tell," David replied. "Dr. Martinez said it could take weeks to determine if there's any real improvement. But honestly, even if it works partially, she's 68. How much difference could it make?" I kept my expression neutral, continuing to eat my dinner while my heart pounded. This was my son talking about his mother's potentially life-changing surgery with all the enthusiasm of discussing a dental cleaning. "What did the doctor say about long-term care?" Jennifer asked, cutting her meat with sharp, precise movements. "Same as before. She can probably manage independently for a while longer, but we need to start thinking about alternatives." Alternatives. The word hung in the air like a threat. Michael looked up from his phone. "Are you talking about putting Grandma in a home?" "We're discussing options," David said carefully. "Your grandmother is getting older, and her needs are becoming more complex." "But she's been taking care of herself just fine," Sarah interjected, finally joining the conversation. Jennifer exchanged a look with David. "It's complicated, honey. Deaf elderly people face special challenges. We want what's best for your grandmother." I continued eating, maintaining the blank, pleasant expression I'd perfected over the years. Inside, my mind was racing. They weren't discussing my future with me. They were discussing what to do about me. After dinner, I helped clear the table, following my usual routine of washing dishes while Jennifer put away leftovers. The kitchen window faced the backyard where David was pushing our old lawnmower, even though the grass barely needed cutting. "He's avoiding coming back inside," Jennifer muttered under her breath as she watched him through the window. I turned toward her, pretending I was trying to read her lips. She waved her hand dismissively and walked away. But I'd heard enough to understand that even Jennifer recognized David's discomfort with having me in their house. That night, lying in the guest room bed with its scratchy floral sheets, I listened to my family's real conversations through the thin walls. David and Jennifer's bedroom was directly above mine, and sound carried more than they realized. "How long is she staying?" Jennifer asked. "Dr. Martinez said a week for observation, maybe 2 if there are complications." 2 weeks? Ooh. David, 2 weeks of tiptoeing around, of watching every word, of pretending we're happy to have her here. I know, but what choice do we have? She's my mother. Your mother, who could have saved everyone trouble by just accepting that this surgery was a waste of money. I pulled the covers up to my chin, feeling colder than the April evening warranted. This was how my family saw me. A trouble, an obligation, a burden they had to manage rather than a person they loved. But they had no idea I could hear every word, and that was about to become their biggest mistake. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Jennifer talking on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice carried clearly through the house, and I realized she was speaking to someone about me. "No, Mother, the surgery doesn't change anything," Jennifer was saying. "Even if her hearing improves, she'll still be elderly, still need supervision, still be our responsibility." I sat up in bed, my heart racing. Jennifer was talking to her own mother, discussing my future as if I were a piece of furniture they needed to relocate. "David thinks we should wait and see, but honestly, I don't see the point. Brookside Manor has an opening in their assisted living wing. If we act quickly, we could have her settled there by summer." Brookside Manor. I knew the place, a nursing facility on the outskirts of town that smelled like disinfectant and had a reputation for warehousing elderly residents rather than caring for them. "I understand it's expensive," Jennifer continued, "but David's practice is doing well, and she has her own savings. Plus, there's the house, my house. The small ranch-style home I'd lived in for 43 years, where I'd raised David after Robert died, where I'd maintained my independence even after losing my hearing. They were discussing selling my house to pay for my imprisonment." I got dressed quietly and made my way to the kitchen, where Jennifer was pouring coffee. She looked startled to see me up so early. "Good morning, Eleanor," she said, switching back to her slow, deliberate lip movements. "Did you sleep well?" I nodded and smiled, pointing to the coffee pot. She poured me a cup, and I sat at the kitchen table, pretending to examine a magazine while she finished her phone conversation in the living room. "I'll call them this afternoon," I heard her tell her mother. "David doesn't need to know the details until we have everything arranged. It'll be easier for everyone that way. Easier for everyone except me." Apparently. David emerged from upstairs, already dressed for work in his navy suit and striped tie. He kissed Jennifer goodbye and squeezed my shoulder. "Have a good day, Mom. Jennifer will take care of you." After he left, Jennifer settled into what appeared to be her daily routine of avoiding me. She cleaned the kitchen with aggressive efficiency, started a load of laundry, and then disappeared into her home office to work on some projects. I spent the morning exploring my temporary prison, listening to the sounds of a house I'd helped purchase, but was apparently no longer welcome in. The walls were thin, and I could hear Jennifer making phone calls, her voice carrying through the heating vents. The first call was to Brookside Manor. "I'd like to inquire about availability in your assisted living facility," she said. "For my mother-in-law. She's 68, recently had surgery, and we feel she needs more supervision than we can provide." The lies came so easily to her. I wasn't failing mentally or physically. I didn't need supervision. What I needed was a family that saw me as a person rather than a problem to be solved. The second call was to a real estate agent. "We may have a property coming available soon," Jennifer said. "A small ranch home, well-maintained, in the Willowbrook neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, large backyard. Yes, I think it would sell quickly. My house." They were planning to sell my house before I was even aware they wanted me out of it. The third call was the one that broke my heart completely. "David, it's me. I talked to both places this morning. Brookside has an opening, and Margaret thinks the house will sell within a month of listing. We need to move on this before your mother gets too comfortable with the idea of staying independent." There was a pause while David responded. "I know it seems fast, but think about it logically. If the surgery works, she'll be more demanding, wanting to go places and do things. If it doesn't work, she'll be depressed and harder to manage. Either way, it's better to make the transition now while she's still adjusting." Another pause. "No, we don't tell her anything until it's arranged. You know how stubborn she can be." Remember when she refused to give up driving? This is the same thing. Sometimes you have to make decisions for people who can't see what's best for them. I sat in the guest room, my hands trembling as I folded the same towel over and over again. They weren't just planning to betray me. They were proud of their cleverness, congratulating themselves on protecting me from my own supposed inability to make rational decisions. That afternoon, Michael came home from college classes. I heard him talking to Jennifer in the kitchen. "How's Grandma doing?" he asked. "Fine," Jennifer replied. "She's adjusting to being here." "Are you guys really thinking about putting her in that nursing home?" Jennifer's voice became sharper. "It's assisted living, Michael, not a nursing home. And yes, we're considering it. Your grandmother needs more care than she realizes. But she's been living alone just fine. That's what worries us. She's been isolated, not taking proper care of herself. The surgery was a desperate attempt to avoid facing reality." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of their manipulation. They'd twisted my hope for reconnection into evidence of my incompetence. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd given me the gift of hearing their true intentions while still believing I was deaf to them. And I was going to use that advantage in ways they never saw coming. By Thursday, I'd heard enough to understand the full scope of their plan. Jennifer had scheduled a tour of Brookside Manor for the following week, telling them I was struggling with depression and isolation following unsuccessful surgery. She'd also gotten preliminary estimates from 3 real estate agents for my house, all of whom seemed eager to list what they described as a prime property in a desirable neighborhood. The most crushing revelation came when I overheard David talking to his business partner Marcus during a phone conference he took in the home office adjacent to my bedroom. "The timing is actually perfect," David explained. "If we move quickly, we can get Mom settled before she starts asking questions about her finances. She's got nearly $200,000 in savings, plus the house equity. That should cover Brookside for at least 8 years, maybe 10 if we invest wisely." My savings. Money I'd accumulated through 43 years of careful budgeting. Money I'd planned to leave to my grandchildren for college. Money I'd intended to use for travel now that I might be able to hear tour guides and engage with other travelers. "What if she objects?" Marcus asked. "She won't have much choice." Jennifer's researched the legal requirements for elderly care decisions. "If we can document that she's not capable of managing her affairs independently, we can get temporary guardianship." "Is she actually incapable?" David paused. "She will be once she understands what's happening. The shock of losing her independence will probably trigger depression, confusion, maybe even some cognitive decline. It's common in elderly people facing major life transitions. They weren't just planning to steal my money and my home. They were counting on the trauma of their betrayal to justify their actions. It was diabolical in its calculated cruelty." That evening, Sarah came home from a school dance, and I heard her talking to Jennifer in the kitchen while she made a late-night snack. "Mom, are you really going to put Grandma in that place?" "It's not putting her anywhere, Sarah. It's helping her transition to appropriate care. But she's not sick or anything. She just can't hear." "There's more to it than that, honey. Your grandmother has been isolated for decades. She doesn't understand how much the world has changed, how vulnerable she is. The surgery was probably her last attempt to avoid accepting reality." "What reality?" "That she's old, Sarah. That she needs people to make decisions for her because she can't see the bigger picture anymore." I listened to Jennifer poison my granddaughter's mind with lies, teaching her that elderly people were inherently incompetent and that family members who warehoused their parents were actually being compassionate. "Will we still see her?" "Of course," Jennifer said quickly. "Brookside has visiting hours. We'll see her regularly." But I'd heard Jennifer's earlier conversation with her mother, where she'd complained about the obligation of visiting elderly relatives and expressed relief that Brookside was far enough away that we won't feel guilty if we can't make it there very often. Friday morning, I made my decision. I was going to give them exactly what they'd given me, a nasty surprise they'd never see coming. While Jennifer was at her Pilates class and David was at work, I used their computer to research everything I could about their financial situation. Jennifer had left her email open, and I discovered they'd been living beyond their means for years. David's accounting practice was struggling. They had 3 credit cards maxed out, and they'd been counting on my money to solve their problems long before my surgery. Jennifer had been planning this betrayal for months, maybe years. She'd researched nursing homes, calculated my assets, and even consulted with an elder law attorney about managing difficult transitions for aging family members. I also discovered she'd been corresponding with interior designers about renovating my house once it became available. She had detailed plans for turning my cozy 3-bedroom ranch into what she called a modern showpiece perfect for entertaining. They weren't just stealing my home. They were already planning to erase every trace of the life I'd built there. But Jennifer had made one crucial error in her research. She'd focused on legal ways to control elderly people, but hadn't considered what might happen if the elderly person discovered the plan before it was implemented. That afternoon, I made a series of phone calls from the guest room while Jennifer was grocery shopping. I spoke quietly, keeping my voice low, but for the first time in 23 years, I was able to conduct important conversations without intermediaries or written notes. The first call was to my bank. I'd like to schedule an appointment to review my accounts and discuss some changes to my beneficiaries, I told them. The second call was to a lawyer, not the elder law attorney Jennifer had been consulting with, but a family law specialist who had excellent reviews for protecting elderly clients from financial abuse. The third call was to a private investigator who specialized in documenting elder abuse cases. By Sunday, I had enough evidence to destroy their plan and enough legal protection to ensure they'd never again be able to make decisions about my life without my explicit consent. But I wasn't ready to reveal my hand yet. I wanted them to dig the hole deeper, to commit more fully to their betrayal, to show me exactly how far they were willing to go. Because once I revealed that I could hear every word they'd said, I wanted the consequences to be complete and irreversible. They'd taught me that family meant nothing when money was involved. Now I was going to teach them what happens when you underestimate a woman who's had 23 years to develop patience and the element of surprise. Monday morning arrived with Jennifer in full organizational mode. She'd scheduled my follow-up appointment with Dr. Martinez for Wednesday, though I'd heard her tell the scheduling nurse that she needed to discuss realistic expectations with my doctor about my cognitive state following the surgery. She was planning to convince my doctor that I was experiencing confusion and depression, laying the groundwork for her incompetency claims. While Jennifer bustled around the house preparing for what she believed would be a routine medical appointment, I sat in the guest room making final preparations for what would actually be the beginning of their worst nightmare. My private investigator, Janet Morrison, had already documented Jennifer's internet searches, her correspondence with Brookside Manor, and her consultations with real estate agents. More damning, she'd recorded Jennifer's phone conversations with her mother, where Jennifer admitted that I was perfectly capable mentally, but that sometimes you have to force elderly people to accept help for their own good. My lawyer, Robert Chen, had prepared a comprehensive protection order that would prevent anyone from making decisions about my finances, housing, or medical care without court approval. He'd also drafted a detailed complaint documenting the attempted financial exploitation and emotional abuse. But the piece de resistance was the recording device Janet had helped me install in the guest room. For the past 3 days, I'd been documenting every conversation David and Jennifer had about their plans, creating an audio record that would destroy any attempt to claim they were acting in my best interests. Tuesday evening, David came home with a bottle of wine and an unusually cheerful demeanor. He'd apparently had a good day at work, probably because he'd been calculating how my money would solve his financial problems. "How's our patient?" he asked Jennifer, kissing her cheek. "Good," Jennifer replied. "The appointment tomorrow should give us the information we need to move forward." They were in the kitchen, speaking in normal voices because they assumed I was napping in the guest room. I was actually sitting just around the corner in the dining room, listening to every word while pretending to read a magazine. "Did you talk to Marcus about the timeline?" Jennifer asked. "He thinks we should move quickly once we have medical documentation. If Dr. Martinez confirms that the surgery didn't work, we can present that as evidence that Mom's judgment is compromised. If it did work partially, we can argue that she's not adjusting well to the change. And if it worked completely?" David laughed, actually laughed. "Then we've got a bigger problem, because she might start asking questions about why we're suddenly so interested in her living arrangements." "Don't worry," Jennifer said. "I've been researching what to say to doctors in these situations. There are ways to express concern that make medical professionals take notice. Depression, isolation, confusion about financial matters, difficulty adapting to change. "You're brilliant," David said, and I heard them kissing. They were brilliant, I had to admit. They'd crafted a plan that appeared concerned and loving on the surface, while being ruthlessly manipulative underneath. If I'd actually still been deaf, they might have succeeded completely. But I wasn't deaf anymore, and tomorrow they were going to discover that their brilliant plan had one fatal flaw. That night, I made my final phone call to Robert Chen. "Everything's in place," I told him quietly, while David and Jennifer watched television upstairs. "They're planning to poison the appointment tomorrow. I want you there." "Are you sure you're ready for this, Eleanor?" he asked. "Once we reveal what you know, there's no going back." "There was no going back the moment they decided to betray me," I replied. "These people have been living in my house, eating food I helped pay for, and planning to steal my life savings while pretending to care about my well-being. I'm ready." Wednesday morning, Jennifer drove me to Dr. Martinez's office with what I now recognized as barely concealed anticipation. She was looking forward to this appointment, confident that she was about to take control of my life with medical legitimacy. In the waiting room, she sat beside me, occasionally patting my hand and speaking in her exaggerated lip-reading voice. "Don't worry about anything, Eleanor. Dr. Martinez just wants to check your progress." But I could see her real expression when she thought I wasn't looking. She was excited, almost gleeful, like a predator about to spring her trap. When the nurse called my name, Jennifer immediately stood up. "I'll come with you," she announced, "to help with communication." Dr. Martinez greeted us warmly in his office. "Mrs. Sinclair, how are you feeling?" Before I could respond, Jennifer launched into her performance. "Doctor, I'm concerned about my mother-in-law's adjustment since the surgery. She seems confused, withdrawn. She's been staying with us, and we've noticed some troubling signs." "What kind of signs?" Dr. Martinez asked, his expression becoming more serious. "Difficulty making decisions, sleeping poorly, not responding when we try to communicate. I think the surgery may have been too overwhelming for someone her age." I sat quietly, watching Jennifer weave her web of lies, knowing that in about 2 minutes she was going to discover that her prey had grown teeth. Dr. Martinez turned to me. "Mrs. Sinclair, how would you describe your experience since the surgery?" I looked directly at him and spoke in a clear, strong voice. "Dr. Martinez, my hearing is perfect. In fact, it's better than it's been in 23 years. I can hear everything, including the conversations my family has been having about stealing my money and putting me in a nursing home against my will." Jennifer's face went white. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "I've been pretending to still be deaf for the past week," I continued, "and what I've discovered is that my son and his wife have been planning to take control of my finances and sell my house to pay for my incarceration at Brookside Manor." That's not," Jennifer stammered. "Mr. Chen," I called toward the door. "You can come in now." My lawyer entered the office, carrying a thick folder of documentation. "Mrs. Sinclair," Dr. Martinez said slowly, "are you telling me that your hearing has been completely restored?" "Test me," I challenged. He moved behind me and whispered softly, "Can you hear this?" "You said, 'Can you hear this?'" I replied without turning around. Jennifer was now shaking. "Eleanor, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," I said, "was thinking that you could get away with elder abuse while I was helpless to stop you." I turned to face her fully, for the first time in a week, and smiled. "Surprise, Jennifer. Grandma's not as helpless as you thought." The look of horror on her face was worth 23 years of silence. Now the real fun was about to begin. The silence in Dr. Martinez's office was deafening, if you'll pardon the expression. Jennifer sat frozen in her chair, her carefully applied makeup starting to smudge as reality hit her like a freight train. "Eleanor," she whispered, "we can explain everything." "Oh, I'm sure you can," I replied sweetly. "You've been quite creative with your explanations this past week. Telling Brookside Manor I was depressed and isolated. Telling real estate agents my house would be available soon. Telling your mother that I was a burden you couldn't wait to be rid of." Robert Chen stepped forward with his legal pad. "Mrs. Sinclair has been recording conversations for the past 5 days. We have documentation of attempted financial exploitation, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, and fraud." Jennifer's hands were shaking now. "This is a misunderstanding. We were trying to help. Help? I laughed, and it felt wonderful to laugh out loud for the first time in decades. You were trying to help yourselves to my bank account. Dr. Martinez looked between us, clearly trying to process what he was witnessing. Mrs. Sinclair, your hearing test results were exceptional. There's no medical reason why you couldn't continue living independently. That's what I told my lawyer, I said, standing up. Jennifer, you can call David and let him know that his mother is not only hearing perfectly, but also thinking quite clearly. Clear enough to have moved my money to a new bank account yesterday. Jennifer's face went from white to green. What do you mean? I mean that the $200,000 you were counting on to pay for your financial problems, it's now safely protected in an account you'll never have access to. My house has been transferred to a revocable trust with a reputable management company, and I filed a restraining order preventing either of you from making any decisions about my care or finances. I picked up my purse, feeling more empowered than I had in 23 years. Oh, and Jennifer? You might want to start looking for a new place to live. I'll be moving back into my house this weekend, and I believe you'll find that your lease on the Maple Street property expires at the end of this month. Robert Chen handed Jennifer a thick envelope. Legal notice of all proceedings. You have 72 hours to vacate Mrs. Sinclair's property and cease all contact except through legal representation. As we walked toward the door, I turned back to face Jennifer one last time. By the way, I heard every conversation you had with those interior designers about renovating my house. I particularly enjoyed your plans to turn my late husband's workshop into a wine cellar. The sound of Jennifer's sob followed us into the hallway, but I felt nothing but satisfaction. David's reaction was even better than Jennifer's. When I arrived at the house with Robert Chen and a sheriff's deputy to collect my belongings, David was waiting in the driveway with the kind of fury that comes from having your carefully laid plans destroyed. "Mom, what the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted as I got out of the lawyer's car. "Language, David," I said calmly. "I'm reclaiming my life from the children who tried to steal it. We were trying to help you. Were you helping me when you told Marcus that my confusion and depression would justify your guardianship claim? Or were you helping me when Jennifer researched the fastest way to liquidate my assets?" David's face crumpled. He'd forgotten that I might have heard those conversations. The sheriff's deputy stepped forward. "Sir, I need you to step aside while Mrs. Sinclair collects her property." "This is insane," David protested, but his voice had lost its edge. "Mom, you can't just destroy our family over a misunderstanding." "I'm not destroying anything, David. You destroyed it when you decided I was worth more to you warehoused in a nursing home than living freely in my own house." Jennifer appeared in the doorway, her eyes red and swollen. "Eleanor, please. We can work this out. We're family." "Family doesn't steal from each other," I replied, brushing past her into the house. "Family doesn't lie about medical conditions to facilitate financial exploitation. Family doesn't count the days until they can get rid of their inconvenient elderly relatives." I gathered my few belongings while David and Jennifer watched helplessly. 23 years of silence had taught me patience, but it had also taught me the value of decisive action when the moment arrived. As I packed, I could hear them whispering desperately in the kitchen, probably trying to figure out if there was any way to salvage their plan. There wasn't. "The moving truck will be here tomorrow for my furniture," I announced as I prepared to leave. "I trust you'll have it ready for pickup." "Where are you going to live?" David asked, and for a moment he sounded like the little boy who used to ask me to check under his bed for monsters. "In my house, David. The house I've lived in for 43 years. The house you were planning to sell without telling me. But you can't live alone. You need help." I smiled at him, and I made sure it was the coldest smile I could manage. "I've been living alone for 23 years, son. The only help I needed was protection from my own family." Robert Chen handed David his own legal envelope. "Outstanding loan documentation. Your mother has graciously decided not to pursue immediate collection of the $68,000 you've borrowed from her over the past 5 years. Provided you cease all contact and make no further attempts to interfere with her life." David stared at the papers, his face reflecting the dawning realization that their financial problems had just become exponentially worse without my money to solve them. Moving back into my own house felt like resurrection. Every familiar corner, every piece of furniture, every photograph on the mantel welcomed me home with sounds I'd forgotten I missed. The creak of the kitchen floorboard, the whistle of the tea kettle, the gentle hum of the refrigerator. But the sweetest sound was my phone ringing with calls from David and Jennifer that I simply didn't answer. Janet Morrison, my private investigator, stopped by on my third day home with a final report that was more satisfying than any revenge fantasy I could have imagined. "Your son and daughter-in-law are in serious financial trouble," she reported, settling into my living room with a cup of coffee. "Without your money, they can't make their mortgage payments. David's practice has been hemorrhaging clients, and Jennifer's spending has put them about $40,000 in credit card debt." "How unfortunate," I said, though I felt nothing resembling sympathy. "It gets better. Jennifer called Brookside Manor to cancel your admission, and when they asked why, she had to admit that you'd never actually agreed to be admitted. Turns out, making false medical claims about elderly relatives is something they take very seriously. They've reported her to Adult Protective Services." I nearly choked on my coffee. They reported Jennifer? For attempted elder abuse. Apparently, this isn't the first time someone's tried to use their facility to warehouse a competent elderly person against their will. They have protocols. The irony was delicious. Jennifer's own research had led her to a facility that was specifically trained to recognize and report the kind of abuse she'd been attempting. "There's more," Janet continued. "Your granddaughter Sarah called me. She wants to see you." That evening, Sarah knocked on my front door carrying a bouquet of grocery store flowers and wearing an expression of absolute mortification. "Grandma," she said when I opened the door, "I heard what Mom and Dad were planning." I had no idea. "Come in, sweetheart," I said, and the joy of speaking directly to my granddaughter without interpreters or exaggerated lip movements was overwhelming. We sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd fed her cookies and milk during childhood visits, and had our first real conversation in her adult life. "I knew something was weird," Sarah admitted. "Mom kept talking about how you needed professional care, but you've always seemed fine to me. Independent, you know." "I am independent," I assured her. "I was just temporarily unable to hear my family planning to steal from me." Sarah laughed, then caught herself. "Is it okay to find this funny? Because honestly, what they did was awful, but the way you caught them is kind of brilliant." "It's okay to laugh, honey. Sometimes revenge is the only reasonable response to betrayal." We talked for 2 hours about her college plans, her boyfriend, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. All conversations I'd missed during her teenage years because of the communication barrier that no longer existed. When she prepared to leave, Sarah hesitated at the door. "Grandma, are you ever going to forgive them?" I considered the question carefully. "Forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation. Sarah, I might eventually forgive them for their selfishness and greed, but I'll never trust them again. And I'll never pretend that what they did was acceptable family behavior." "I understand," she said, hugging me tightly. "Can I come visit you again?" "Anytime you want, sweetheart. I have 23 years of grandmother conversations to catch up on." The final act of my revenge came 6 months later, though I hadn't planned it quite that way. David and Jennifer lost their house in foreclosure. Without my money to fall back on, their accumulated debt and David's failing business created a financial collapse they couldn't prevent. They were forced to move into a small apartment across town, while I continued living comfortably in my perfectly maintained home. The poetic justice was that Jennifer ended up taking a job at Brookside Manor, the very facility where she'd planned to imprison me. Apparently, they needed someone to process admission paperwork, and her research into elder care had given her relevant experience. I learned this information from Margaret, my next-door neighbor who'd become a close friend since my return home. Margaret and I spent our mornings gardening together and our evenings playing bridge with 2 other women from the neighborhood. For the first time in decades, I had an active social life. "Jennifer looked exhausted when I saw her at the grocery store," Margaret reported one Thursday evening. "She kept staring at the price of everything like she couldn't believe how expensive things had become." "How sad," I replied, though my tone suggested otherwise. The final revelation came when Michael called me directly, something he'd never done when he thought I couldn't hear. "Grandma," he said, "I wanted you to know that I'm not taking any money from my parents for college. I got a full scholarship to state, and I want to earn my own way." "That's wonderful, Michael. I'm proud of you." "I'm ashamed of them," he admitted. "What they did to you was unforgivable." They're still your parents. Michael, don't let my relationship with them poison yours entirely. It's not about you, Grandma. It's about who they showed themselves to be. I don't want to become the kind of person who sees elderly relatives as financial opportunities. A week later, Michael started visiting me regularly. Unlike his parents, he was genuinely interested in my stories, my opinions, my experiences as a woman who'd lived through 7 decades of American history. One evening, as we sat on my front porch watching the sunset, Michael asked the question I'd been expecting. Grandma, do you ever regret how things turned out? I thought about David and Jennifer struggling in their cramped apartment, about the grandchildren who'd learned to value integrity over inheritance, about the independence I'd reclaimed and the respect I'd demanded. Michael, I said finally, for 23 years, I lived in silence. I accepted whatever scraps of attention my family offered, grateful for any contact at all. I made myself small and undemanding because I thought that's what love required. I sipped my iced tea, enjoying the sound of ice cubes clinking against glass. But love doesn't require you to accept abuse. Family doesn't mean allowing people to steal from you while pretending it's for your own good. And being elderly doesn't mean surrendering your right to make decisions about your own life. The Crickets were beginning their evening concert, and I marveled again at being able to hear them. Your parents taught me something valuable, even if they didn't mean to. They taught me that sometimes the people who claim to love you are actually your biggest threat. And they taught me that I'm stronger than I ever imagined. I looked at my grandson, this young man who'd chosen integrity over easy money, principle over family loyalty. So no, Michael, I don't regret how things turned out. For the first time in over 2 decades, I'm exactly where I belong, surrounded by people who value me for who I am rather than what I can provide. It's been 2 years since I regained my hearing and discovered my family's betrayal. David and Jennifer have never apologized, though Jennifer did send a Christmas card last year with a note saying she hoped I was happy with my choices. I am, actually, happier than I've been since Robert died. My house is filled with sound again. Friends visiting, music playing, my own voice reading books aloud just because I can. I've joined a book club, started taking piano lessons, something I'd wanted to do for decades, and even begun dating a widower named Frank who lives 3 streets over. Sarah graduated high school with honors and visits me every few weeks when she's home from college. Michael stops by regularly, and we've developed the kind of close relationship I never thought possible with my grandchildren. They've both made it clear that they want nothing from David and Jennifer's eventual inheritance, preferring to build their own lives on their own terms. David's accounting practice failed completely. He now works as a bookkeeper for someone else's firm, earning a fraction of what he made when he was stealing from me. Jennifer is still at Brookside Manor, where she's learned firsthand how elderly people are treated when their families decide they're inconvenient. I've been told they blame me for their financial ruin, as if my refusal to fund their lifestyle was somehow unreasonable. They still don't understand that the money was never theirs to begin with. Last month, I received a visit from a woman named Patricia, whose elderly father was facing a similar situation with his own children. Word had gotten around about my case, and she wanted advice. "How did you find the strength to fight back?" she asked. I thought about her question for a long time before answering. "Strength isn't something you find," I told her. "It's something you remember you always had. For 23 years, I thought my deafness made me vulnerable and dependent, but it actually made me self-reliant and observant. I'd learned to read people's faces, to pick up on subtle cues, to survive on my own resources." I poured her another cup of coffee, marveling again at the simple pleasure of being able to hear it percolating. When I discovered I could hear again, I had a choice. I could continue being the grateful, undemanding elderly woman my family expected, or I could use the skills I'd developed during my silent years to protect myself from their greed. Patricia nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Your father isn't helpless," I continued. "He's experienced. He's survived decades of life, made countless decisions, overcome obstacles you can't even imagine. Don't let anyone convince him that age equals incompetence." 6 months later, Patricia sent me a card. Her father had successfully fought off his children's attempt to control his finances and was living independently in his own home with appropriate support services. These days, I spend my mornings working in my garden, my afternoons reading or visiting with friends, and my evenings enjoying the symphony of sounds that most people take for granted. Wind chimes on the porch, birds in the backyard, the distant sound of children playing in the neighborhood. But the most satisfying sound of all is silence. The absence of David and Jennifer's voices planning my destruction. They gave me back my hearing, though they didn't mean to. In trying to silence me permanently, they taught me the value of my own voice. And now that I can hear again, I'll never let anyone silence me again. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just getting even. It's getting everything you deserve and nothing you don't. I'm 70 years old. I own my own home. I have money in the bank. I'm surrounded by people who genuinely care about me, and I haven't written a single check to support my ungrateful son in over 2 years. Life is good when you can hear it clearly. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.